name is Sarah Metcalf, and I am here to speak with you regarding the Northwest Passage. I have been hired on as an environmental consultant to provide my expertise and knowledge regarding who should be granted sovereignty of this passage, why, and what stipulations should really come along with this. So first, I kind of just want to go over a brief history of this passage. The Northwest Passage has always been covered in ice. Up until recently, though, it has almost been impossible to conquer, and many have actually tried. The decreased travel time for shipping, trade, and personal travel is what makes this ice melt in this passage so intriguing. The first trade ship and cruise ships have recently actually just completed successful journeys through this passage. The first trade ship being in 2014 and the first cruise ship in 2016. So as commercialized access through the Arctic Circle becomes more possible, the question is who should be granted sovereignty to the Northwest Passage? And this is something that I really hope to provide insight and clarification on today. So let's see here. It's kind of impossible to argue that the shipping route is so much less. This red line is outlining the old southern route that trade ships were once forced to take. And it's actually 1,000 miles longer than the Northwest Passage, which is indicated by this blue line up here through. And you can see how it goes through the Arctic up here. So the huge economic and time gain is just really impossible to deny. Though this Arctic climate environment up here is a lot more sensitive than the southern area that was once utilized heavily. So some health impacts related to the opening of Northwest Passage, they're important to highlight, and I just want to go over some of the pros and cons real fast of the opening of this passage. So there's possibly going to be a decrease in overall respiratory issues on a global scale due to the opening of this passage. Trade ships, really, they don't have the same standards or laws associated with their air pollutants than cars do. So they really burn a lot of cheap bunker oil fast, and they emit a lot of carbon into the air. So decreasing their transit time by 1,000 miles is going to overall decrease the amount of greenhouse gas emission. This, however, is going to really increase the air pollution within the Arctic, and air pollution has shown to increase respiratory issues, cancer, mortality rates, and so the indigenous population is most likely going to be affected in this way by this change. Also, decreased environmental hazards and wildlife health risks on a global scale will probably be seen, but an increase in wildlife deaths and environmental hazards in the Arctic will most likely be seen due to, decreasing trash and oil spills globally, but ultimately increasing the risk for trash and oil spills within the Arctic is going to provide this effect. Also, less inhabitable land for Inuits and wildlife. Global warming is happening, and we've really lost a lot of ice already in the Arctic. Just from 1979 to 2000, there's been a really huge decrease in available land due to ice melt. And shipping and trade through this passage is just going to increase this. It's going to cause forced migration from of the Inuits, the Arctic population, and its wildlife. The eating habits of the Inuits are going to be altered. They can't hunt caribou as much. They're relying a lot more on processed foods and convenience foods than they are their hunting skills because of the migration. And then access. We can't access these indigenous populations as much anymore. We used to be able to access them through ice roads, but now with the increased ice melt, we're relying more on airplanes, which is a lot more expensive, and it really decreases the quality of access, whether it's healthcare or food that we're providing them. And then there's an increased risk of the marine ecosystem being thrown off. I had the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Roger Berry, who's the director of the Glacial Data Center in Colorado, and he's really concerned about the decreased ice melt, or the increased ice melt decreasing the safe places for narwhals to hide, or it's really increasing the ability for orcas to get into the narwhal environment where they once really weren't at. And so this is going to increase the predatory dangers for this sensitive species. So my recommendation ultimately is to allow trade and cruise ships to utilize the Northwest Passage and grant Canada the sovereignty of the passage. I would like to create toll fees for all ships coming through this passage, while attaching strict spending policies to this toll revenue, and then have Canada update or create any disaster procedures. And why is this my recommendation? Commercialization of the passage is inevitable. Throughout all my research and speaking with everyone, and it's just the revenue and the desire to open this passage is so great. It's gonna happen. As much of an environmental impact as it's gonna have on the Arctic, it's inevitable. The Canadian environment is going to be the most affected by this. The Canadian Arctic is the largest part of the Northwest Passage, so they're going to have the most environmental effect on their wildlife and their population. Toll fees will help generate increased revenue that can be utilized to care for Arctic land and population. Strict spending procedures will ensure the Canadian government is continuing to protect the sensitive environment throughout commercialization, and updating procedures will allow preparedness and effectiveness in the face of environmental hazards. So oil spills are going to be inevitable, and as long as we have revenue set aside and procedures set in place, we're going to be able to act on that as efficiently as possible. So the Canadian government, they're already really involved in not only research to help protect their endangered Arctic species, the Inuit population, and their environment as a total. They're already really, really involved, and this revenue is just going to help them continue these great duties, and it's going to give them more of an incentive and the ability to do more good. So these are some of the current things that the Canadian government is already doing, and I believe will continue to do. So they're really focused on global efforts on the impact of climate change in the Arctic region. They already have major negotiations of environmental elements that address critical issues such as pollution. And then one of their main things is ensuring that economic and social development is sustainable and benefits the Arctic inhabitants, particularly Indigenous people. It is the key objective for the Canadian government. But it's not just a domestic issue. Long-standing bilateral relationships with the Canadian neighbors are benefiting the region and its inhabitants and helping to build vibrant communities. So this economic gain from the tolls is really going to help the Canadian government ensure that these relationships with their neighbors are being kept, ensure that they're continuing making sure that their Indigenous population is sustainable and provide more benefits for them. Canada really exercises their sovereign right in the Arctic land and ocean, so continuing that trend as well. And then they just ensure that decisions affecting Inuits are brought closer to the communities themselves, really making sure that they're not just making decisions for the Inuits, but they're really allowing them to have a decision on how this revenue is spent as well. They have so much emphasis and drive to maintain the health of the wildlife, the Inuits, and their environment, that these toll fees and revenues are going to help benefit them through this time. So this kind of just goes over more of what we really need to look at, not only for the Inuit population, but also for the wildlife population. We need, to provide the revenue in order to maintain their environment, food security, housing and infrastructure, making sure their access to health services are sustained, their health status is improving or staying the same, not decreasing, and that their health behaviors are, really sustainable as well. We don't want any negative health effects or health behaviors or any mental health issues as a result of these environmental impacts. We really want to make sure they're gaining the knowledge and learning, as well as providing more, not only like nutrition education, health and wellness education, and again, all of this revenue coming in from the tolls is going to provide the Canadian government with the ability to ensure that all of these different branches are met in order to most efficiently provide the best health services we can and maintain the best health for the wildlife and the Indigenous population. And then what we need to look for in the future is, so global reduction of greenhouse gas emission. Has this decreased travel time really decreased the greenhouse gas emission globally? And same with oil spills. Has it done the same for oil spills? What does the greenhouse gas emission and oil spill frequency look like in the Arctic? Does it seem excessive? Is it okay? What can we do to decrease it? What can we do to maybe stop these things from happening? And then just continually look at the health of the Inuit population and then the Arctic wildlife population. What do their populations look like? Has the populations increased, decreased? Are polar bears and narwhals becoming more extinct? Are we able to maintain this population? And what does the overall health of the Inuit population look for? Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my recommendations today. I did provide all of my contact information here for you. I am happy to provide any further clarification or answer any questions or concerns. And I just really want to make sure I have open communication and we can continue to work together on this issue.